Those two I do know. Okay. We're finishing up really quickly. You guys had some good discussion. We didn't get through all of them. We're not going to spend all morning on the last three that we didn't talk about last week. But I want to finish out the chapter because these fruit of the Spirit that mentions here, they go all the way down to verse 23. But then we got to finish out through verse 26 in the chapter itself of Galatians chapter 5. And keep in mind, as we're going through this, as he gets into chapter 6, he's actually going to show us where we put these things into practice. You know, the practical application for the fruit of the Spirit and going from there. So last week we talked about kindness and goodness, talking about faithfulness, the whole idea of gentleness and self-control. Now, I don't really want to pass over gentleness. I asked you guys last week, and I'll do it again this week, how does a person exhibit this? I mean, because, well, there's a person that exhibits gentleness. How would you observe that? What do you do to show that?
Sometimes it's in your tone, you know, how you speak to one another, whether it's with love or harshness.
Okay.
Sometimes it's in your actions.
It is. I like that. That's exactly right. People can pick up on that. You know, whenever I think of, when I'm looking at that whole list, you got to throw in their wisdom, right? You got to throw in their wisdom. And when I think a person that's wise is a person who is gentle. And he's going to obviously exhibit the last one there, and that idea of self-control. Now, the self-control, and getting back to what Tina talked about, obviously the self-control in our actions, of course, you know, you don't want to fly off the handle and hit somebody. But I'll tell you right here, the self-control of the tongue is what James talked about. Tim?
Well, in our thoughts. I mean, our tongue doesn't speak without our brain telling it to do so. So it's our thinking that we need to tame.
You know, that's good. You know, can you think of areas where you have to control your thinking?
Every day, all the time.
Circumstance? I'm thinking about jumping to conclusions, making assumptions about people, thinking the worst. What else of, you know, controlling your thoughts? Just a lot of those things came in my mind. How do you do that though? I mean, because, you know, sometimes when somebody does something, you might want to conclude or think the worst case scenario. You know, he said that because I know why he did that. How do you control your thoughts? Study. Prayer. That's it?
Well, watching your elders, they're supposed to be setting a positive example for you.
Right. But I mean, for you to be able to just absolutely control what you think, how are you going to do that, Warren? Okay. So that whole idea of slowing to speak, think before you speak. We grew up with that one, right? But that gets me back to my question. I mean, how do you control your thinking? TJ?
It's the things about what you put in.
That's huge.
You're putting in good, positive, and you're studying the word. And that's what you're putting in, and that's generally what's going to.
I think you hit the nail on the head. If you surround yourself with negativity, that's all you think. You're only thinking negative, and I think that's so true. What were you going to say, Gene? Great minds think alike. Okay. And again, getting back to that idea of controlling our thoughts, you know, you have garbage in, you're going to think garbage. And so that purity needs to be there. I know we use this passage a lot, but I think it was making reference to this idea of our thought process. In Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but being transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so it's getting that garbage out. And you can't get the garbage out without putting good stuff in, Gene.
This is kind of similar to that. And I'll tell you what, I'm having to watch less news today because I get aggravated. When you get aggravated, you're more tense to do that. If something happens at work, we hear about this.
Right.
Father comes home, a bad day, he comes in, one of the kids says something, he says, get to your room. You know, so that's what TJ said, what comes in, you know, will come in.
That's true. The self-control, It's so many facets. And so our thinking process, and who hasn't been guilty? Who hasn't been guilty of thinking things we shouldn't be thinking about? I mean, you say, well, Chuck, it's just natural. Well, our God is wanting us to exercise self-control in all these areas because it's going to help us as we get on here, help us with what? Well, he mentions here in verse 24, and those who are Christ have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. The whole point that he's trying to drive home here is there's nothing in common with these two classifications here, the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. And he's saying, you've crucified these things. You say, well, because you know what? If you don't exercise the fruit of the Spirit, you're exercising the works of the flesh. You can't be in the middle. And so we're saying, well, when I became a child of God, did I do this? Did I crucify these things? Well, who became a Christian here and rose up and never sinned again? Who rose up and said, I don't have anything to work at? Obviously, we're growing. We're a work in progress. But that's my question for me and for you. Are we a work in progress? Or have we got to a point and said, Lord, what you see is what you get now. I'm not growing anymore. I'm actually the same I was 10 years ago. No, we need to be changing. And that's what he's talking about here in Galatians. He says, we've crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. You have to work at that. We have to be growing and getting stronger, maturing in the faith. And that's what he talked about in Hebrews chapter 5. You need to be taught the first principles, the oracles of God. Why? Because you need milk. I hope that we're going on to the meat here as a church. I hope that we're sinking our teeth into that stuff that's making us stronger and that we just don't want milk. Milk has a tendency to just say, well, we can just put up with the lack of development. And that's what we're against. So he says in verse 25, if we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. I like that. It's basically telling us, talk the talk, you walk the walk, be consistent. You wear the name Christian. Don't be like those at Sardis that has a name that they are alive, but they're really dead. Guess we're finished with, I'll probably allude to this. But yeah, he says, if you're going to be led by the Spirit, it should be evident. What turns off people of the world who might look at religious people? What's one of the big things? And I know there's a lot. There's something really jumping out at me. Why'd you say that? That's what I was thinking, Trey. Why do you think of that?
Because I think you act one way in church and then you go out into the world and you act completely different.
That's huge. To me, if that's what they're looking for. They're looking for the consistencies. Not only they're looking for consistency, what else would you think that they're looking for to show that you're really not being a hypocrite, although you're not perfect? What are they looking for? What is that? Inconsistency. They're looking for inconsistency, but if they're looking for you not to be, I should have clarified it, Brian. If they're going to look for you not being a hypocrite, they're going to be looking for consistency. What else they're looking for, Mallory?
Humility.
The humility, which would include what? Yes, that's huge. Nobody's going to say you're playing the hypocrite if you're apologizing and admitting that you're not perfect and you're trying to do better. And I guess that leads me into a third one. If they're not seeing that you're changing, that you're getting better, that you're improving, people should be able to see you and say, you know what? I knew you 10 years ago, man, and you're different today. Well, thank you. Because you've learned to control yourself in situations because you're growing. And so they're going to observe these things to show that you're not playing the hypocrite, Mark.
There's also a strong faith in all of that. If your faith is solid, you're not going to be moved, even though people are coming in situations of jungle to challenge that faith. Not like a child going here and there where the wind carries. You're going to be anchored.
Okay, and so they should be able to observe your steadfastness, that you actually use your faith. I think that's important too, because if people find out that you're a Christian and you know them and they know you a lot, but that whole spiritual side of you just never surfaces, surfaces, there's a problem there. They should see that. It's one thing to tell people you're a Christian. That kind of gets back to what Mallory's talking about. But it's one thing to tell people you're a Christian. You just live it. That's what I've always said. You know, I remember a preacher one time saying, and I've told you this, he got in the pulpit and said, you know, even your paper boy should know that you're a Christian. I go, I don't tell everybody that comes to the door, hi, I'm a Christian. But the way I perceive that is this, that is if you have a paper boy and somebody takes him aside and says, hey, do you know that guy you deliver the paper to is a Christian? He should be able to say, oh, well, that doesn't surprise me. All right, rather than saying, you're kidding me. That guy's a scoundrel. The guy's always calling me up and chewing me up and whatever. Trey?
But the Christian word in our society is so overused that it really doesn't mean anything to say you're a Christian. So it has to be outward.
You've got to, it's got to be outward. I mean, we've got to demonstrate it in the way we act, the way we speak, in all circumstances, especially you guys, you're out there in the workforce. I mean, you're out there in secular jobs, and a lot of people see you. Now, I'm trying to be mindful of that. Of course, I'm not like that, but I mean, but people might know of me, my neighbors and my friends and acquaintances and people I study with. But they have to see that godliness that is there, that wisdom, that self-control, because nothing will turn them off quicker than hypocrisy. And hypocrisy shows, like we've been talking about, in a lot of different ways. Okay? Walk. That's what he's saying here. And did you notice what it says? Let us also walk in the Spirit. It implies, or it's actually telling us not to say, well, I walked in the Spirit at one time. One time I didn't blow up at you. One time I did exhibit self-control. There was a time I remember I was gentle. Well, that doesn't mean you have gentleness, because you're going back and talking about one time that you exhibited that. This is an ongoing thing every day in our life, especially husbands and wives. We didn't even get into that. Start applying all these things in that kind of a relationship, or being a parent. Okay? We're almost finished with this chapter. I'll get you guys to read. Then he talks about, and let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another. Okay? As he just talked about the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit, he says, now, don't become conceited. Is there anything in the fruit of the Spirit that's the opposite of being conceited? I was just looking at the list. Is there anything in that list that's the opposite of being conceited? Is there anything in the fruit of the Spirit there that will prevent you from being conceited? And what's conceited? Self-absorbed. Okay. Anything in that list? Specifically? We think.
Well, love is towards others. It's not for me. So being conceited is all about me. Love is how to do that other people.
Right. And we had a good discussion on that. You know, it's sad that there's some people in this world, of all the people they decided to fall in love with, it was themselves. And that's sad. And that's the opposite. And that's what he's talking about here. Don't become conceited and provoking one another. How do you provoke one another? Now, this is the opposite, remember? There's another passage where it uses it in a positive sense. Does anybody know where that is? Provoke one another to good works. Yeah. And he talks about provoke one another to good works, stir one another up. He's using it in a negative sense here. And so he says, let us not become conceited, provoking one another. How do you provoke? How could I provoke Mike back there? Any ideas how I could provoke him?
Ag it on.
What's that?
Ag it on.
How?
Well, like poking the bear. You know, you don't want to, I can't think of the right words. If you know he has a area of contingency, then don't poke at that particular, leave it alone. Unless it's something that needs to be, handled, just leave it alone.
All right, but I'm really trying to get, I want some specifics out of you guys. Mark? Not Mike per se. Go ahead, Mark.
I got more Bible knowledge than you do. I don't want to poke it back at you. You don't have any money.
Okay. But maybe that, getting back to that previous one, right? You're conceited, you brag on you.
That could be a novice that's recently baptized, that somebody can provoke them and drive that person away.
Yeah. Can you guys think of other areas that how you can provoke somebody, man?
Well, I think it's really, in today's society, like joking can sometimes just cross that line where you can be like having fun, but every now and then you can always just cross that line, and that will often could build up walls and barriers.
Do you ever notice how sometimes, though, we can justify provoking somebody by saying, being so sensitive? Oh, I'm allowed to provoke you because I just came back with it. It's your fault if you're provoked. And what's the matter? Can't you take an insult? No, I can't. And there are times when people are sensitive about things, whatever it might be. But I do think that idea here is linked with the previous point. You can provoke somebody just because you're trying to make yourself look better. That's one of the reasons why people do stuff. You put other people down, not only does that provoke them, you put them down just to try to puff yourself back up. Okay?
But that's the opposite of fruit of righteousness, which provokes peace, by love to make peace.
And that's the problem, isn't it? If you're going to provoke somebody, you're not trying to create unity, you're trying to create division. And you have to ask yourself, why did you say that? Really, when we greet one another here, or you greet somebody, or you're talking with somebody, you need to ask yourself sometimes, and it would be good. Sometimes we walk away and we get upset, and it might make matters worse, but I think it would do good to provoke thinking in the person if they came up and you said something, and they said something that hurt you, and if you turned right around and said, why did you say that? I wanted to make you feel bad. They're not going to be honest about it, right? But see, that's one of the things. We'll say something in such a way, that's the danger of the tongue. Sarcasm. Isn't sarcasm at times actually telling the truth?
Well, yeah.
Isn't that what it is? It's like, wow, nice looking tie you got there, Gene. What did I say? Did I say he has a nice tie? No, come on. Did I say he had a nice tie?
Verbally, you did.
Yes, I said he had a nice tie. But Sandy knows what? That I didn't say. It's sarcasm. And we have to ask ourselves, well, why'd you say it? Why did you say that? And if we're honest with ourselves, do we provoke other people? Is that really what we want? We just wanted to give them that little dig. Gene.
What we have to do when we're talking about that is the body language that we show when we say it. I know that, I don't know, because, I always want to be truthful or this or that, but I know that I can say something to somebody and maybe the expression, I think I'm serious.
Yeah.
So you got to be careful. Maybe smile or,
Well, and that's where you got to pray for wisdom, because you're right. Wisdom dictates, be careful, especially with new converts or visitors that are here, your own kids, because we're even warned about that, right? Children, parents, bring your children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. You don't want to provoke them and turn them against what is right because of your attitude. Jane?
I think as far as visitors, what we have to be careful is, introduce yourself and this and that, and say, well, where do you go to church? And that can kind of,
Get them defensive. Yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of questions.
Yes.
Yeah, I understand exactly, Dave.
Goes back to kindness and gentleness.
It is. It's all linked to it. That's why we're seeing here that he's winding down this thought. So let us not be conceited. You know, like you can make all these lists. It's interesting, right? You can teach the works of the flesh and the fruit of the spirit, and then say, so what are you saying? Really, people will do that. They'll go, so what are you saying? Well, what I'm saying is don't be conceited, don't provoke other people, and don't envy one another. Oh, okay. Why didn't you just come out and say that? I did. You know, don't do this. And he's coming, and we need those practicals. You know, people might say, you know, like, well, you guys have spent enough time on this, and you're talking about visitors, and you're talking about how you say something, your body language. Hey, I want a book, chapter, and verse for that. Give me a book. You know, this is the whole point of down here. There's the and the like when it comes to works of the flesh, and there are a lot of and the likes when it comes to the fruit of the Spirit. There are a lot of ways that you show gentleness and self-control and how that you care. And I'm going to tell you something. If I'm going to weep with those that weep, you want to see me exhibit interest? Here's how you exhibit interest when somebody's hurting. You're listening. You don't have a big smile on your face. Like, hurry up, I got to go somewhere. You know, somebody, I got some bad news. You do, and you listen. People can see whether you're sympathetic. And guys, I think that we as a body of Christ, that's how we grow. And that's what Paul's wanting. He's wanting them to apply these principles. Now let's get into, let's just read the first 5 verses. The first 5 verses, okay? Tony, take the first 2. Let me look here. The first, well, no, 2 is kind of short. So, well, no, 5 is really short. So you take 2 and then Trey will read 3.
Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you are spiritual, restore such a one in the spirit of gentleness. Considering yourselves less, you also be tempted. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ.
For if anyone thinks himself to be something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. But let each one examine his own work, and then he will have rejoicing in himself alone and not in another. For each other shall bear his own load.
All right, you want to see application of what we've just spent 2 weeks talking about, with the works of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit, is now he's talking about the application. Here it is, guys. Brethren. Okay? Talking to Christians. Well, if they're Christians, they will automatically do that. No. No, Christians need to be told to do certain things. So, brethren, now, where do we apply these things? Well, he's going to throw a situation of, okay, how are you going to deal with somebody who's not towing the line? Who's not being faithful? I tell you, it's easy to exhibit fruit of the Spirit when people are being good to you, people are being nice to you, people are being faithful. Man, it's easy to do that, isn't it? It's easy to love those who love you. We're talking about circumstances now where you might want to exhibit this. Man, when it comes to brethren being wayward, in my, I'm not that old, but you know, and the years I've been preaching in different congregations, places I've been at, business meetings, I have never ceased to be amazed of how quickly somebody wants to withdraw from somebody. I've just never ceased to be amazed on it. I mean, first business meeting, nobody's gone to see the person, and somebody says, we need to withdraw from that person. And I looked over, I said, have you visited them? No. I said, what is missing here? The fruit of the Spirit. Everyone is missing. The first one, love. And the very thing that he's saying here, if a man is overtaken in a trespass, we would just say, what? If we're being uncaring. That's a kind of a nice way to put it. What would we say? If a man is overtaken in a fault, what's another way of saying that? Yeah. If a man has left the Lord, you know, that's what we're saying, right? If the man has left the Lord, the man who sinned against our Savior, well, okay, it's always all bad, but let's not build a wall before we even try to help them. It's almost like we've written them off. If somebody's overtaken in a sin, can they come back? Can they repent? Yeah, it just seems like people just want to just like wash my hands. I'm done with this. Trey.
And The funny thing about that is we work so hard to try to bring people to Christ. Why do you want to push them away without giving that same kind of effort?
It's so true. You do all this effort, and it wouldn't be, this wouldn't be so sad if I hadn't witnessed this in the past. But there's that concept too. Somebody becomes a Christian. It's like, see you Wednesday and Sunday. We're done. What? No, we'll have our class next Monday. I'll be here next Monday. We've already discussed the importance of worship in our studies, especially when they became a Christian. Before they became a Christian, talk about what God's going to expect out of them, count the cost. But you know what? We don't want to leave them dying. They need to grow. They need to get stronger. And so we want to help them. You're on your own now. Well, no, when somebody becomes a Christian, remember, they become a part of the family. And we have brothers and sisters who look out for one another. And when he says if a man is overtaken in any trespass, is he not also implying that you can know when a brother is overtaken in a trespass? Say, well, it's none of my business. This passage is saying your brothers and sisters' lives is your business. Reason why it's your business? Because you want them to go to heaven. Look what he says. If a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who which are spiritual. Now see, here's the whole point. Who, me? Well, they're the ones that left the Lord. So what are you telling me? You're telling me you're spiritual and they're not? Well, yeah, because I haven't left the Lord. I'm not overtaken in a fault. Haven't been overtaken. Well, good. You're just the person we need. What? Well, to restore that person. You who are spiritual, you have responsibility. So who's that you here? Is it just certain members of the congregation? Surely that's just the elders. Is that just the elders? No, he's writing to the whole church. Now, elders, of course, we understand. Within a local congregation, you've got new converts. They don't know a whole lot. To put that kind of burden on them. But I'll tell you, they can do a little bit, can't they? Even a new convert can, if he sees somebody overtaken in a fault, can just encourage them to do the right thing. All right, and to go to them, and the Bible speaks of that. Another passage, Jesus spoke about that. So you restore such a one, and so now you wonder where this concept comes from. You need to be restored. That's biblical. We didn't make that up. It's not a Church of Christ tradition. Have you been restored? Or just coming back doesn't restore you. If you've been overcome in a sin, what do you got to do to take care of it? You've got to repent of it. Now, since we brought the subject up, it's good for clarification. What's the difference, or what should be the difference between being restored publicly and you being restored privately? Or is there a difference?
Everybody knows it. It's a general knowledge, whether it's in the church or out of the church or both.
That's the difference. But when should that be required? When's the difference? When should you not have to, and when should you have to?
If it's only yourself and God, it comes public when more than two people know about it.
Okay. We're on the right track there. Exactly, Gene.
Well, if someone becomes very relaxed in attendance, like that, and then they come to you and say, Chuck, I wish you'd make an announcement, that so-and-so realizes that they're haven't been attending they should, and they want to repent and this or that. That's not good. In other words, they should come before the whole congregation.
Well, Gene, now we're into, we don't have specifics on restoration, okay? We don't have specifics on how somebody becomes a Christian. And we do have to be a little bit careful about being dogmatic about a certain process. Now, let me take some positives from what you said. If somebody's going to do that, number one, people need to know who that is. Okay, in other words, I got a letter from Patrick. Got to pick on your dad. Now, if you don't know who Patrick is, this isn't going to do much good. So that's why sometimes, the necessity of coming forward so people can actually see who is this. Okay, so who is this? If Patrick came forward and handed me a note and wanted me to read this in front of the congregation, say, Patrick here wants you to know that he hasn't been living like he should, and he's made it right with the Lord.
I agree with that.
Yeah, see, so that's my point. Now, making sure that people know about it. So whether he comes up here or whether he's there and everybody knows him. But I think common sense tells you need to make sure that everybody knows who that person is, okay? Larger congregations, that's even more necessary. I mean, I've been at congregations, there's 300. I mean, you're not going to know who's who, right? So again, the restoration, and getting back to this, what constitutes a private as opposed to a public? Mark talked about this. Are we to behave ourselves in the church? Paul told Timothy. How could I bring reproach upon this church? How could I bring reproach upon? Give it a black eye.
By doing something out in the public that shows that I'm not living as a Christian.
How does that give the church a black eye?
And I'm a member of this congregation, therefore everybody there must accept what you do because we know about it, we assume they know about it.
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is that if I do something that somebody in the community sees, they're going to think the church here approves of it. Okay. So how do we fix that, James?
If I see you, I'm downtown, all over town, and I'm seeing you, coming out of the boat,
Right.
like a friend, or coming out of the boat, and this week and that, this week or that. Here I'm saying, of course, take what I would do. I'd come to you and talk to you.
Right.
I'd come to you and talk to you.
That's what he said to do, right? Try to restore.
I'm part of this congregation. You have a great influence over the Christians here. So they should know what you do.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
And it goes for all of us, right? Yeah. Now, we're not private detectives. I mean, I'm not going to spy on you and you're not spying on me. Let's understand that. We give each other trust.
I know when I was working in town, my kids didn't know what time I was going to pull up behind them because I was running around.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the whole point. We have that trust. I don't know what you watched on TV last week. You don't know what I watched on TV last week. We just what movies nobody knows that. We're not private eyes, okay? We're not in that business. We give trust for one another. He's talking about here, if somebody's overtaken in a trespass, which is a sin, you've gone contrary to the word of God. Now, if he says you restore it, that means this is public. Because then I don't know. If I don't know when how can I help them? I can't. Patrick.
Is this whole conversation akin to the principle like in 1 Timothy, when an elder sins and it's verified by 2 or 3 witnesses, rebuke that elder in the presence of all? I think the phrasing is something so that there will be fear.
Right. I think that there's a common denominator there. I think as far as handling things right, you don't want a he said, she said kind of thing going on, okay? When I hear something, you want to go right to it. I've done that. I've gone right to the heart of the matter and cleared it up. Misunderstandings, okay? Let's nip it, okay? And let's not be offended. I think on the recipient end of all this, let's not be offended as brothers and sisters if somebody comes to you and say, hey, Chuck, did I see? Because one of the things that could create more problems is when I say to you, I can't believe you even thought that. I've heard that so many times over the years. I can't believe you even thought that. Well, I'm just saying, I thought I saw this, and I just want to clarify. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt. But did this happen? No, thank you. Okay, it's done. Let's not get upset about it. The person obviously cares enough to come to you. Is there that love? I don't want to see like it's none of my business. Your life is none of my business. But I also don't want to think my life is none of your business. You see how it works two ways in all of this. And I see Paul's covering both. Brethren, if any man is overtaken in trespass, so it's telling the whole congregation, wow. So if I'm overtaken in trespass, these brethren are going to come to me and try to help me. Yeah, you need to be aware of that. That's what he's telling them here. He says, such a one in the spirit of what? In the spirit of gentleness. You want to bring them back. consider yourself lest you also be tempted. What? What does he mean there? No, if be careful when you go to Mike and he's been gambling, because you might become a gambler. Is that what he means? What's he talking about? Lest you also be tempted.
I think he's just speaking to that in general as far as being tempted, don't you think, or not? I mean,
yeah. I think the idea here is when he says, go to him in a certain way, if you don't go to him in a certain way, what could happen?
Well, you could turn to these things, outbursts of wrath.
You're not
Somebody
listening.
should be gentle and they tell you something that you blow up about.
Exactly right. The whole idea here is that we're going to help somebody. And that's why we as a congregation, now not only on an individual basis, but as a congregation, we don't want to do something that's going to cause us to sin. You know, I've often said that to people when I've actually visited with them, and I said, you know what, I'd say, don't force our hand on this. We don't want to withdraw from you. We want you to be restored. We want you to come back. But we would often tell them, I think, every time I've talked with people in that situation, I've always told them, if we don't do what the Lord tells us to do, we're sinning. We would be sinning, and we don't want to. So you need to understand why we're doing what we're doing. There's always that temptation when you're faced with any situation that we've talked about, of going to one side or the other. That's what I find happening here when he says, lest you also be tempted. You're tempted to go and act this way, whatever it might be, in dealing with that particular problem. The goal is always to bring them back. Remember 1 Corinthians chapter 5? Remember he said, deliver such a one to Satan? Does anybody know what he says after that? Deliver such a one to Satan? Yeah, for the destruction of the flesh, that you may save his spirit, so that you may save his soul. I mean, the ultimate goal here has to be, we want to help, not hurt. Let's not make it worse. And I'll tell you, sometimes the best of intentions. You want to know how you can make it worse? I got a few things coming to my mind here. What could you do that would make matters worse when it says, if a man is overtaken in a trespass, you who are spiritual, let's say you even go to them in gentleness. You're not going to read my mind, so I'll just tell you. One of the things that could hurt is if I go and see you 6 months later. What does that say? You've been gone for 6 months. Been caught up in it for 6 months. We've known for 6 months, and I haven't said a thing. What's that say about me?
You didn't care?
Okay. Now you're coming?
Probably because your conscience is bothering you. That's the only reason you're here.
Samantha, when do you get worried how long will you wait to be worried when Kevin doesn't come home for supper? Month? I want an answer.
7 o'clock.
Okay, so sometimes he runs late, right? You didn't mention days. You're mentioning hours, right? Because of his work schedule. But there is going to come a time when something kicks in, you know what, this is too long. There's a problem with us when that mechanism doesn't kick in when we see a brother or sister in transgression. When we don't want to go.
People they want some members of the congregation in addition to the elders. Call them and be concerned and all.
Sure, they absolutely do.
That probably would impress you more than anything.
I believe so.
They expect the elders to come.
Yeah. And when we don't have them, they always expect the praise. And I'm encouraged when I go to people and they say, yeah, I've heard from a bunch of people. I'm sitting there going, great. I got a big smile inside. I mean, because they're looking, well, I expected you to do that. But I really didn't see it coming from others. And I just want you to see, as a church here, guys, if you only knew the kind of influence you have on one another, okay, because of them viewing the equality. I want them to view equality with me. I am not above them, but there's There's that mentality is what I'm saying. And and that's what he's saying here as a church. Brethren, do this and have that concern. And then he comes on and talks about in verse 2, bear one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. What's it going to take to do that? There's a few things that I think have to be in place. Mike?
We need to know one another well enough to know when things are, when there's things that are bothering you or burdening you.
I mean, I could bring up some personal things in some of your lives. And I could say to people, did you know that about them? Or you could say some things about some brethren here that I wasn't privy to. We don't have to know everything about everybody, but the point is, we know some things about some people. We might not know everything about all people. But there has to be, as Mike's talking about, how can I bear one of this burden if I'm not around you? And especially if we're strangers. Mike?
I was going to say, it also helps going back to verse 1, because we're talking about if someone is overtaken and trespass, we're trying to restore them. Like you mentioned, if we show up, a couple of months later, if we're not, or we don't make the attempt to know that person, all of a sudden we show up to say, hey, we've noticed you have been services. Well, you never talked to me when I was there. You never invited me over. There's that kind of plan. I guess it just shows the wisdom of God's word of how it builds on one another. It's not just something throughout. There's reasons behind.
It's true. It's true. I mean, you can go to 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and talk about what this means. We can't even eat with you. Well, you never ate with me before. You didn't socialize with me before. It's not going to be any different afterwards. You just didn't. There was not that closeness. And I think it's telling us here what makes it effective is that when people see that genuine love before the problem happens. You understand? It's like you're building up a bond now. So if those problems do arise, you've got a tool to use to help, as Mike's been talking about. And there needs to be that awareness. And again, that bearing one another's burden is the idea that I'm looking out for you and you're looking out for me. It needs to be there, at least. We've got that look of when you're right next to an ammo place and you hear a big boom, you're kind of wondering, should something explode? Don't panic. We have coverage. And of course, when he says this, he says, and so fulfill the law of Christ. We're talking about things today, folks, we don't have a choice in. Now, that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. If I told Debbie I loved her because Christ told me to, is that a bad thing? No, people, but I want you to love me even though Christ told you not to, or even if Christ didn't say to. Well, the point is, everything that we do, guys, is for the Lord. I got to tell you, if you love your wife the way the Lord tells you to love your wife, she's going to appreciate that. And vice versa. If Christ is in the forefront, and this is why it's his church, it's his body, we function as a family, we care for one another, we look out for one another, and we will bear one another's burdens. And when he says one another, that doesn't mean like, look, Chuck, you need me any hour, I'm there for you. Great. Well, I'm there for you too. Oh, I'm never calling you. But I'm there for you. You call me, and I'll be mad if you don't call me. Can I be mad if you don't call me? No. We have a double standard here called pride. Bear one another's. And we need to care for each other and look out and rely on that relationship that he's talking about here. And then he goes on, our time is done, about verse 3, about thinking yourself to be something when you're not. So we'll pick up on verse 3 next week, guys. And appreciate your comments. Good stuff.
Stress.
He worked last night. He worked a little overtime. We had to do that. Because we were nice. He said that's fine. And I also
Yeah. Good, you don't stand there.
No.